Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Humanist Perspective. My name is Jim Dugan. I'm your host for this month. My guest this evening is Julie Schwam Harris. She has a long history of activism with a focus on the rights of women. In 2013, she helped organize a coalition called LAW, or LAW, meaning Legislative Agenda for Women, which advocates for Medicaid expansion and access to the full range of health care, economic security for women and families through equal pay for women, raising the minimum wage, and paid leave, comprehensive sex education, and better prevention of and response to domestic violence and sexual assault. She also supports efforts on LGBT rights, voting rights, and criminal justice reform. During her many years working for the City of New Orleans, 1994 to 2010, Julie formed many initiatives to ensure the basic rights of New Orleanians. Julie, welcome this evening. We're glad to have you. And I'm sure the Legislative Agenda for Women is a group that very few of us have heard about. Tell us briefly a little bit about it.
Sure. Well, the Legislative Agenda for Women is a coalition of organizations. It's a loose coalition. We're 18 organizations right now. And these organizations mainly are focused on women's issues, but not just on those issues. They have a broad range of topics that they work on. And together we chose those four broad topics that you just delineated to be an agenda for women, particularly at the state level, but also we work at the federal level and locally as well. So these organizations, which include some national, some local, some statewide organizations, League of Women Voters, National Council of Jewish Women, UU Voices, Unitarian Universalist Church Voices Group, Coalition of 100 Black Women. These are just some examples. We have decided that if we can fulfill the mission of trying to lift up some of these issues related to women, we're also helping families, because women are primary caregivers in such a large number of families these days, and they're the primary breadwinners as well in many cases.
And we chatted a little bit just before the program, and it seemed that Medicaid expansion and other health-related issues are very high on your priority list. Why is that important? How does that fit in with your mission?
Well, before I even get into Medicaid expansion, I didn't delineate what makes us different from other coalitions, because there are many, many coalitions, and we actually coordinate with some of them. One of the reasons that we decided to form a coalition is that we saw that there was a need to link people to their legislators, the people who are actually making decisions. Many organizations send out messages, and this is an important reason why people should affiliate with organizations they care about. They sort of pre-digest information, gather information, send it out to their members, and their members can choose to act on it or not. But we have a very intentional point and a commitment that we make to each other that we will inform and engage our individual members on who their legislators are. It's amazing. You can enter a room of lawyers, you can enter a room of activists, and if you pin them down and you say, now, who's your state representative? Who's your state senator? They may not know. They have vague ideas. They may think it's actually who their congressperson is or who their federal senator is. And so if we can get that link, that engagement right into people's heads and encourage them with the right information to speak with them, to join meetings that we set up in legislators' offices, to come to house parties that we set up. We can actually more effectively influence what those legislators do. And so that's how I think we're different than most coalitions.
So it sounds like an informed electorate is something you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely.
But it also sounds like you're trying to make government itself more accessible to ordinary people.
Yes, make it, I tell people that the state legislature is like hiding in plain sight. It's there, it's in the news every day, and yet the actual link to your legislator, who is the one most focused on what you care about, because they really don't care as much about what other constituents care about, only theirs. If you are not making that connection, how can you be angry at decisions that they're making or votes they're taking when you haven't even told them specifically what you think is important for them to do on an issue?
So it often seems rather rare that a voter really knows the voting history of their representatives.
Absolutely. That's another thing that we help with. We try to get that history on these particular issues and help them learn how to find their own information. And again, we emphasize, a lot of us emphasize, because we are members of organizations, that you affiliate with an organization of people that has an agenda you trust. Because there's a lot of information flying around on the internet, on Facebook, but unless you actually are part of a group, it's a little bit harder to have some consistent sort of growth in your knowledge on these issues, and that's what we're trying to promote.
So is it time now to go back to the Medicaid expansion?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry. I would not want to say my main thing because it's so important. That's why I spend a lot of time active with law. Well, Medicaid expansion. Louisiana for a long time has had really poor outcomes in health, not just for women, and we're mostly involved with women and families, but for everyone. And Medicaid expansion, which was one of the programs that came in with the Affordable Care Act, most southern states, particularly deep south states, had refused it, although others around the country had taken that expansion. We tried for 4 years in coalition with an organization very focused on, and very expert on health care. That coalition was called Health Care for Everyone Louisiana. So with them as the lead, the League of Women Voters is another one of our key leads because they had committees, dedicated to that issue, and a committee person, Linda Hawkins, very knowledgeable about these issues. We informed our members about what was going on, and for 4 years tried to advocate legislatively to get around Governor Bobby Jindal's absolute refusal to take Medicaid expansion. We failed, but the electorate, and many of us are members of the electorate, even though we work with 501c3s, the electorate chose a governor who ran on a platform of, I am going to bring the Medicaid expansion to the state. He had been a legislator who supported it, even though it was defeated in the legislature. And on his second day, he accepted that Medicaid expansion. So though we didn't win legislatively, we know our advocacy had an effect on the whole climate in the state, along with this partnership.
And so what does that Medicaid expansion mean to ordinary Louisianans, especially to women in Louisiana?
It means a lot. It means a lot. Before Medicaid expansion, we were one of the states that had high percentages of uninsured people. Now, those numbers are just starting to come down because Medicaid expansion just started with the term of the governor, which was in January. But we know that already 300,000 people have registered for that Medicaid expansion, which really is a form of insurance. And so those are people who are right now getting health care. And there are stories being told already about people who have been able to actually find a life-threatening illness because they now have access to a doctor and to the care that they needed. And we have a model from the past, the Louisiana Children's Health Insurance Program, which was many years ago. That was a program offered by the federal government that Louisiana and most states did take advantage of, and we actually did very well on it. So this Medicaid expansion really can follow that model of the Louisiana Health Insurance Program. And we are going to see much better statistics going forward on access to health care.
And this is something that makes health care more available to individual women, but also to their children, I assume.
Absolutely. Well, it's the Medicaid expansion is for working adults whose income it was too low for them to qualify for subsidized insurance on the exchanges, but they aren't destitute. They fell into this hole where they had no access to
And I think
health
that's
care.
something interesting. I think most of us wouldn't be aware that there is that hole
There was this hole in the provision of care through ACA, and it was created by the way the courts interpreted the law. And not forcing the states to take it. So the states had a choice to take it, and at a very advantageous rate. It's going to save hundreds of millions of dollars over time. It's already saving money. The key for us as a coalition is to be vigilant, because in Congress, as well as at the state legislature, there are still elected officials trying to end ACA altogether, either curb or stop the Medicaid expansion, which has already proven to be so helpful to so many people. And so we're going to have to be vigilant that we not allow our legislators to backtrack on these things. And also, for many, many years, one of the reasons we had poor health outcomes is that they were cutting and cutting and cutting the health budget. The health budget was one of the few where they were able to cut, and so they cut it as the state experienced budget problems. And we have to be vigilant to not only let them not cut it anymore, but actually to put back some of the things that had been helpful in the past.
I don't know if I want to wander too far off of this subject, but you mentioned the limitations on what the legislature can cut. We have this problem in Louisiana with the constitutional system that we have that really limits what the legislature itself can make cuts in when they have a budget issue. It's mainly education and health care.
Absolutely, and so they cut higher education, and that's not one of our primary focuses, although many of our organizations do work on education and higher education issues. They cut health care. Part of the problem is it's not just that there are things protected that they can't cut. They cut back on revenue generation. There are so many tax breaks for corporations and for entities that are not necessary, are not productive as far as the jobs that it brings or the well-being to the state. We have got to get a handle on that, and Governor Edwards is waiting on a final report from the committee to talk about what would be appropriate ways of raising revenue and limiting some of these loopholes and tax breaks so that the state can have a balanced budget that makes sense for the services that people want. We want roads, we want health care, we want schools. If we want them, we have to pay for them. How do we tax appropriately and fairly, and not allow too many loopholes and too many
And where do you see this going in the next year or two? Are these are you mostly just monitoring what's going on? Do you see some specific activist issues that you need to address in the next year with regard to the Medicaid expansion or related health?
Well, with Medicaid expansion, there have been attempts to to specifically try and put on things that would bureaucratically make it hard to implement, contributions from the part of those who are already not making a lot of income. So to force them to have some offset in costs would kill the program. We're going to monitor that. The other thing is there are budgetary things, though we specifically work on those issues that we've just talked about and are going to continue to talk about. We're very concerned about the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a wealth building program for low-income people, low to moderate income people, that works very well around the country. It's funded by the federal government, but the state can choose to put in a certain amount, and we put in the lowest amount of any state in the country. If we put in a higher amount, it would help our low and moderate income families have more money to actually take care of themselves, as well as to participate in the economy and help the economy in general. So we look at those kinds of things like the Earned Income Tax Credit and others.
I'd like to maybe just move a little forward to it's something very closely related to that, and also high on your list of agenda items, which is equal pay for equal work. This is certainly something we've heard a lot about in this election cycle, something that I think more and more people are starting to think about is becoming a topic of public discussion. And I know you have a lot to tell us about that.
Right. Well, first of all, as I told you, I wear red because women are in the red. It's a fact that in this country, though we have laws, we've had federal laws and some state laws to try and get rid of the discrimination that has historically caused and is still causing women to be paid less than men for doing equal work or very similar work. That type of discrimination is still in existence. We know that the laws are not effective. They need to be beefed up. Women nationally earn about 70, 79, 80 cents on the dollar, but in our state, we are and have been either at the bottom or second to the bottom for the last 5-6 years. So there's something wrong about how we are allowing women to be paid in Louisiana, and we've got to change that. And we know that by passing laws that require transparency of being able to talk about your wages at the workplace without fear of being fired. You know, you can be fired for asking about your wages. I don't know if you know that. In private enterprise, you could be fired. There are some weak protections through labor regulation, but you could still be fired for talking about your wages, and people are fired all the time for breaching that job mandated silence or muzzling. And so we know that if with pay transparency, with people having a way to go to a third party in our bills that we as a coalition helped write and put together, and that the governor supported this time. We were thrilled that Governor Edwards is with us on this. With the third party Human Rights Commission as someone you could bring your questions to, your complaint to, if you can't resolve it with your employer, we know that there would be much, much less discrimination in the workplace than there is today, because it's not all intentional. Some of it is unintentional.
Or just habit, or just custom, or something people just don't talk about. So I'm assuming, and please correct me if I'm going down the wrong path with this, I'm assuming that the discrimination itself would be unlawful and could be the basis of suits, but it's a question of making that more transparent when it happens.
Right now, you have to prove that someone is intentionally discriminating, and how do you prove what's in someone's heart? And they may not have been intentionally discriminating, but because they were not forced to just examine their own pay practices, to be able to analyze and make sure that they weren't inadvertently discriminating. Now, we're not trying to punish people, and we don't really want a lot of lawsuits. What lawsuits take a long time. We're not trying to damage business. We are trying to actually help business do better by providing a fairer workplace. Employees are more loyal. They stay longer. There's more stability in the workplace. They work harder for employers that they feel are fair to them. It really helps all around as far as the employment relationship. It also helps in the economy. If an employer is not paying women fairly, they're actually sort of externalizing some of their labor costs to others, because that woman, if she's making less than others, she may not be able to afford anything but subsidized rent. She may need food stamps. She may need subsidized health care because she isn't making what a man would make in that position. But all these things are tied together economically. It's not just about equal pay. When we talk about all of the issues, economic security issues that face women and families, and it's not just women, it's women and families, we also like to talk about minimum wage. Right now, 2/3 of the people making minimum wage are women. And that's a big part of that pay gap.
2/3 is a lot.
2/3 of the people making minimum wage in the state are women. Excuse me, it's now 80%. It was 2/3 a few years ago. It's actually gone up to 80%. And a minimum wage is not a living wage. You cannot raise a family, even a small family, on that low of an income. And those businesses that are paying the bare minimum are also externalizing costs to society, because they have not calculated what it takes to get that labor, and for that labor to be able to live and succeed in society, pay bills, pay for housing, pay for food. So minimum wage is an important issue for us as well. It's one of those.
Do you use the term corporate welfare when you talk about this, that the, in a way, government services are subsidizing these employees who are underpaid?
Well, welfare is such a charged word that corporations have, and some people have used to stigmatize subsidies of other kinds that people have gotten over the years. You could use that, but the main thing is they are not paying what they should pay for the work that they're getting from people. I don't know if most people even know, the tip minimum wage is $2.15 an hour. It's not even $7.25, it's $2.15. And you say, well, tip minimum wage is so low because they make up all that money in tips. And some people do. What a lot of people don't know, what a lot of low-income workers and tip workers don't all know themselves, is that if you make anywhere less than that $7.25 at the end of your shift, the business is supposed to make up that difference. You're not supposed to just live off the $2.15 plus whatever tips you happen to make. You're supposed to make a minimum of $7.25, and that business is supposed to make up that difference, which is still a very low and not a living wage, but there are people that can go home with less than $7 an hour because they don't know that, or because their employers do not make up that difference. That's one thing. Another thing is, both of those minimum wages, even if you make the tips that lift you over that $7.25, are not adequate for what people need to live. And they're part of that whole gestalt of what it takes to have families succeed in this country. Another thing is paid leave. Most of the people that need paid leave are working in jobs that are low-income jobs, and they don't give you paid leave or paid family leave.
Especially with the tendency to have quote-unquote job sharing, where everybody's a part-time employee or a contract employee, and you don't have those kinds of benefits, and so you don't have paid leave, vacation time, you may not have medical benefits.
Absolutely. You have opened up a can of worms with that expression, because there are people who want to work full-time, and businesses are purposefully not giving them full-time jobs because they are trying to avoid paying certain benefits. So they may need quite a few what would have been full-time workers, but they are purposefully scheduling them, and often not even in regular settings, so that if you want to work two jobs, if you don't know what your hours are going to be, how can you work that second job? How can you pay for child care and know exactly what days you're going to need that child care for, which is a whole other issue. Child care is so expensive. That part-time worker conundrum is really a difficult one as well. There are just many workplace issues that we need to work on.
I think we'll be running out of time, and before we know it, I would like to work in one other part of law's agenda, which is violence against women. Louisiana is a very violent state. Tell us about the situation we're in and what needs to be done.
Well, we're the second deadliest. I use the word deadliest because the Violence Policy Center issued a report that came out, and they do it every year. They've done this for 20 years. They issued a report saying that Louisiana is the second most deadliest state for women who are victims of violence. One perpetrator. They're not talking about random shootings. They're not talking about somebody, spraying bullets and some women get killed. But when it's someone like a partner, a husband, a dating partner, we are the second deadliest in the country. So why? And what do we do about it? We devote some of the smallest amount of state money to the kind of programs that would give women the services and the protection that they need from violent partners once they make a decision to leave, once they're looking for help. So we don't do that well in Louisiana.
I think we need to talk just a little bit, just to talk a little bit about what that is. Like, what are those services that
Services would be like a domestic violence shelter, a secure place, so that if you're leaving and you're coming away with your children, you have a place to go while you're making decisions about, what you're going to do if the partner has been arrested or not arrested, whether you've called the police or not called the police. If you're looking for a secure place, if you're looking for actually some place to sort of think about, what am I going to do? If you haven't been working or are making very little money, you may not have the money to actually go rent a new apartment. You may need some help for the beginning of that. We need to train counselors to do what are safety plans for women. I mean, it takes a whole network of people, really a whole village, to help a family that's trying to get away from an abusive relationship, and we don't have those services. We also are we are overprotective of people and their guns in this state. It has been very hard at the state level to deal with limiting the ability of perpetrators or those who have been caught in domestic violence situations to limit their ability to get a gun or to buy another gun if one gun is taken away from them. The states that have the tightest background checks tend to be the states that have less murders of women. They also have less homicides of police officers because they are more protective of who can get access to guns, and we tend to be one that protects the gun owners less than the potential victims. So there are quite a few things that we need to do to tighten our laws.
And certainly someone who is looking to escape from an abusive relationship needs to have access to, somehow they need to be able to find some of these services. They need to know there's someone that will help them plan, because not every, like you said, not everybody is just has the wherewithal to just say, oh, I'll move out. Okay, some of us do. We're lucky. Some others may not. And most of us wouldn't have a clue where I wouldn't have a clue where to start.
Well, there are programs in New Orleans and in this region and in Louisiana. They're few and far between, but they are working mainly from the kindness of strangers. I mean, they're nonprofits that, because they get very little state money, they do get some federal money, and they work on donations. And they provide excellent service. There was a film that was shown recently at the film festival, Five Awake, which talks about some of the champions, recent champions on the issues of domestic violence, some successes in the legislature, small but significant successes. Legislatively, State Representative Helena Moreno, United Way activist Kim Sport, and United Way staff person Charmaine Cassiope, the head of the New Orleans Justice Center, Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. These are women leaders who have worked to really reactivate changing the climate, the legal climate, and the advocacy climate around domestic violence. So we're making some headway, and we support them. They're the leaders on those issues, and we as a coalition, we support them in the work that they're doing.
So we have maybe 30 seconds to wrap up. How do people find out more about your organization if they want?
Well, I urge them to join one of the organizations that that I've mentioned, such as League of Women Voters or National Council of Jewish Women or IWO, AAUW. They could always call you, and you could give them my information. I'm happy to share information with them about the other 18 organizations in our coalition and how they can get active. If nothing else, I'll tell them who their legislators are so they can even choose to just get in dialogue with them.
So if they're active in many of these other institutions and organizations, they'll be active with LAW.
Yes, yes.
Well, Julie Schwam Harris, thank you very much. This has been very informative and interesting. This is a group that most of us don't know very much about here in New Orleans, and we thank you for your time with us this evening.
Appreciate being here.